One of our commissioners, Maria Higgin-Joseph from NPR, reminded us over and over again is our concern for not yet citizens, for those who live, who love and work here as well, and who may be voting in the future and who are taking part, that we need to consider that when we consider all peoples of the U.S. That we need to partner with and proactively assist communities in their efforts to conserve natural and historical community assets and landscapes through the use of National Park Service programs such as the National Register programs, tax credits, river, trail, and community assistance programs, national landmarks, national heritage areas, and others. We have the opportunity to have Queen Quet with us here today, and if you haven't had the opportunity to speak with her, she can tell you about some of the work she and members of the Gullah Geechee community are doing to meet some of this criteria. We're also talking about maximizing the use of philanthropy as, quote, friend building and catalyst to innovation and excellence. Let's get real, we need money. And philanthropy is one way we can do that, and I think we need to be really explicit about our relationships with philanthropic organizations. We are also talking about evolving the national park idea to advance the role of the Park Service in embracing and collaborating with grassroots efforts outside of the parks around the principles of preservation, environmental consciousness, and cultural heritage. This is happening all over already. For instance, we have the Miami Community Partners, which Audrey Peterman, which was part of in South Florida, that work together with the Everglades and Biscayne National Park on continually involving diverse members of the South Florida community in supporting and visiting the parks. We're also talking about the need to foster and create mutual respect, common working relationships, operational goals and programs with communities, agencies, and organizations adjacent to the parks, in recognition that, quote, as Dan Galvin said earlier, we are all in this together, socially, economically, culturally, environmentally. And I want to add to this, this isn't about added value. It's not just about inviting some of these people to the table because it looks good. This is about real collaboration, which means that all of us have to shift the way that we think and shift the way that we do things.
Your entire presentation, both presentations combined for me, had brought forth the question of transnational identities and how we're going to deal with that dynamic. And again, I use my own people as an example. As Gullah Geechees in one area, we're called Gullah Geechee. Another area, we're called Seminole or Black Seminole. And another area, we're called Muskogee. And we have Native American ancestry and African, but we are always looked at as only being allowed to be in the discussions about America or African Americans, never in the Native American or tribal discussions, even though I was elected in a traditional, quote, tribal, end quote, ethnic pattern. So how do we deal with transnational identities in all of the recommendations, and how do then, because even with what you mentioned statistically as a mathematician, that says to me again, those categories are not sufficient, okay? Because there are people who could check more than one box if they were, quote, allowed to, if it would register correctly on the computer systems. So what do we do in terms of transnational identity and multicultural identity, and truly then having that face and voice seen within the park system?
The first thing I want to say, I think this is a larger national conversation with our new president. We have that. Even what he represents alone has brought this conversation up to the surface for many of us who haven't had that conversation in the past. I'm bothered too by the census check boxes and what that means. One of the things that I envision is that this is an opportunity for people from these diverse backgrounds to come to the table and tell us and share with us what would it mean to have a conversation that transcends our usual method of identifying people based on a singular indicator. I don't know how we had that larger conversation. I've been thinking and working on that for years too. I don't know how we had that conversation, but I think we need to start having it.
I don't, but I'm going to say something after this. Just a couple of remarks, and this is, I'm just really so anxious to say something because I believe that this is an area where the National Park Service can take leadership. And two things I'll mention. One is that in our work as a committee, we had opportunity to work with the National Education Council and work with people like David Larson, who's a master interpreter within the National Park Service. And there's something that we learned about, and he talks about, that we promote in our recommendations, which is the with not for concept. In other words, that really it's not about the Park Service providing education or interpretation for the public, for a specific community. We're working with communities in order to develop what that is. In other words, what is it that's important to a specific community or group of people that needs interpretation?
I'm Charles Thomas from Outward Bound. I wanted to point something out to the gentleman over there that said about the urban connection, which is absolutely true and essential. But I also want to caution us to know that sometimes it's not a case of build it and they will come. It doesn't happen that way sometimes. Especially when we're talking about the populations that I serve. And for 49 years, I haven't been doing that, but for 35 of those 49 years, my organization has been serving the underserved, the overlooked, and the avoided. And with the intention of getting them out there and introducing them to these beautiful natural areas and upgrading their academic and social skills. And it works. I was one of those kids many years ago. But this morning, I was driven in a van over here because I got mixed up anyway. I wound up here in a van, and I was talking to the driver. And he was 55 years old, African-American man, and I asked him, has he ever been to a national park? And he said he didn't know. And I said, have you ever been camping? And he said, yes, 3 times in his life. And I said, have you ever been to the beach? And he said, no, I'm still working on that one. The point I want to illustrate here is that we're talking about a guy who's 55 years old, doesn't know, he doesn't even know if he's been to a national park, and we want to serve that population. And when I presented to the NPCA and the commissioners in LA, I talked about doing a survey of 100 of my families that I worked with. Of 100 of those families, 97% of them didn't know where a national park was. But 99% of them wanted to go to a national park. So we have a population here that really wants to get there, but doesn't know how to get there and doesn't know what to do once they get there. And I'm not telling you folks anything new, I suppose. But what I do want to illustrate here is that there is a population that does not have a voice, that we have an obligation to connect. And what Carolyn and Stephen are doing with their recommendations are trying to help us connect them, but I'm telling you, the connection has to go much deeper than building it or saying we're going to create an educational program. You got to go into the communities and get them out of there. You got to go into the homes. I can't tell you how many times I've gone in and fixed kids' lunches and took them out into the parks. And that goes on generation after generation after generation. But we can have the most beautiful programs anywhere, but unless you're deeply embedded in the community, you're not going to get out those folks with the voices who don't know what's going on out there.